and Mr. Hong. And then the research team will be sharing their findings, and then we will have 20 minutes of Q&A. Because this is quite a small, intimate group today, so please feel free to just chime in later. We will try our best to wrap by noon. If that sounds all right, let us hear from Evan first, and then right after Mr. Fong, Deputy Director of the China. Please.
Thank you. So thank you for coming along this morning. We very much look forward to the report and what the team has to say. So our focus at Civic Exchange for the past couple of years has really been what is the pathway to net zero by 2050. We're obviously very happy that the government has adopted the timeline towards 2050, but at the time, as of last year, we didn't really have much concrete pathway towards how we're going to do that. We're not always going to be difficult like it is for the rest of the world, but we do believe that, as of where we were, we have been a bit slow. So this particular report is follow on with a series of other research we've published, which is right now focused on the energy sector. So we're very happy that the Chief Executive in her latest policy address has actually recommitted to 2050 carbon neutrality. By the way, we did wonder if that's serious because there weren't a lot that came out, but this time there's more that came out. And there was a launch of Climate Action Plan 2050, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, and there was a setting an interim decarbonization target to reduce the city's carbon emission by 50% by 2035. Now this is about 5 years slower than IPCC recommendation, latest recommendation. So we do believe that our research will help spur on how do we do this quicker, right? And can we do this better? So power sector, why we focus on power sector? Because it accounts for 66% of our GHG transmission emissions. Obviously, buildings, everything, etc., added together, the power sector is an important part of how we're going to decarbonize, right? So we have developed 5 energy mix scenarios. So this is really just about energy mix, and we believe that there are various pathways towards how we can actually do the reduction. Now, just a bit of preview. We will talk about nuclear. Okay, it's a little bit, people feel differently about it, but we believe it's an important part of the mix, so we're not shying away from it. We believe that we need more of that. We believe that we need to scale up domestic renewable energy and also expand our waste to energy facilities. Okay? And obviously enhance regional collaboration as well. So everything added together is needed to get the reduction that we can. So if the government does adopt our recommendations, we can actually reduce 70% of the energy sector's emission before 2035, which is a better achievement to us. And there's also health benefits, and we can also yield up to 460 billion of new wealth if we act now. So that's within the report. And I hand over to Fiona on the team.
In our website and to download the full report. So this is an executive summary for the situation. Why we need to develop this research is because Hong Kong definitely need to reach the carbon neutrality before 2050. And then also we have really strong scientific evidence told us we need to reduce the emission by 50% before. This is the government mentioned is 50% before 2030 compared with 2005 level according to the Climate Action Plan. And then according to the latest IPCC 8R6 Working Group 1 report, humanities had 9 years left to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature rise. And the Hong Kong sector is Hong Kong top carbon emitter. So our key question is, how can Hong Kong decarbonize its energy sector? How will we get out this research question? I will talk it in the later slide. And then we come up 4 key recommendations. First one is to scale up domestic R&D, enhance regional collaboration, enhance grid balancing, and then monitor development in green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. Hopefully, if the government adopt our recommendation, we can reduce 70% of energy sector related emission before 2035. That makes Hong Kong really align with what IPCC recommended. And then the carbon neutrality can be reached before 2050. So let's dive into our research. Why Hong Kong needs to fast track its climate action? According to the scientific evidence, the latest IPCC AR6 report, Working Group 1 report, I believe you already read through it many times already, so I'm not talk detail here. But for the second item, the current policy pathway is 3 degrees, 2.3 meters of sea level rise cannot be ruled out according to IPCC AR6 report. This is what I want to highlight today, because Hong Kong is a coastal city. According to our research partner, CWR, this puts new coastline as Cooking Road Central at earliest as 2030 or between and 2040. This is a really huge fact for Hong Kong. That's why we need a more urgent action today to avoid this crisis happen in Hong Kong. And then also CWR, according to CWR APACC T20 index ranking, Hong Kong is even more vulnerable than Jakarta and Bangkok when facing the coastal threats. If you want to learn more about China water risk research, please feel free to Google CWR and then you definitely can find their research. And then the political commitment, I'm not talk about the Paris Agreement. The more interesting one is the China commitment and the recent alliance, the 1% framework, which developed and crafted by Tsinghua University 海振華主任. It's really clear outline 10 key principles for China to decarbonize. How China decarbonize and then how China develop their own plan. That shows that China has a really strong commitment on the decarbonization. And then Hong Kong really announced the climate action plan recently, but we think that still have room to improve further. So this is from our own research. Hong Kong has high potential to achieve net zero emission by 2050. So that you can see, last year we developed 2 scenarios. One is according to the current policy, and the second one is the 2050 decarbonized scenario. Hong Kong has, because we doesn't have such kind of hard-to-abate sector here and heavy industry, so that our decarbonization journey is really can happen before 2050. So that this is from our last year research. And then here, if we delay our action, we make the cuts become more difficult. That's why we need a more ambitious emission reduction trajectory must. So that you can see here. So since now we are on this pathway, not on this pathway. Because even though the government updated the latest climate action plan, if we want to make our life easier and make sure our assets are secure under the climate change, we need to reduce at least 6.6% of emission per annum to reach our 2050 target. However, we are not on track now. We need something to help us to achieve the goal much rapid, more easier. So, according to last year, that's why in the last year report, Civic Change and WRR have identified 3 key action areas for Hong Kong to decarbonize, which is the energy sector, you can see, has the highest potential, building energy efficiency, and the mobility. That's why today we will only focus on the energy sector. because Hong Kong energy sector is the top carbon emitter, make it the key action area to decarbonize our city. This is the film made in 2019. The fossil energy still account for more than 70% of our energy fuel mix. That contribute 26.3 million tons of carbon dioxide emission, which account for 66% of Hong Kong total greenhouse gas emission. So that is a huge number. And then but the transition cannot be. The transition must plan well before we kick off the transition, because no one wants the energy shock. This is what the latest economist cover page, because these years, like in England, China, they also encounter some issue. Like in England, the energy price gets high really rapidly, and then China, some place is not sufficient energy supply. That's why our researchers believe that we need to make sure that we consider the four principles. This is the four principles we would like. This is the four key principles we follow in our whole research, which is the environmental performance, reliability, safety, and affordability. This is a really important consideration among the whole research. And then, therefore, we evaluate different decarbonization power options to form 5 energy mix for Hong Kong. What option we have now on our table? Domestic renewable energy, imported clean energy, hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. We fit in all the technology, the existing and the emerging technology into a comprehensive analysis, and we developed a numerical analysis for to assess the potential and then to study the feasibility, which include the availability on a large scale, technological maturity, like LCOE, greenhouse gas emission, environmental impact, and any kind of challenge. And then we come up this 2050 fuel mix scenario. So Fong will talk in more detail about the scenario later on. Therefore, for the detailed analysis, so we conduct a detailed analysis on zero carbon technology. We categorize the technology into 2 different pockets. The first one is in the near-term one, which include the domestic RE and the imported nuclear and the imported renewable energy. This is what technology we existing, and then we can deploy it in large scale immediately. And then for the longer term, with higher uncertainty, which include the green hydrogen with the CCGT combined cycle gas turbine technology, and then the natural gas with CCS. This is more long term. Frankly speaking, when I study in the university, I'm already spent time to study the carbon capture and storage. I also published some paper related to the carbon capture and storage. But 10 years later, I'm standing here. So far, still a really small number of pilot plants exist. However, when we facing such urgent issue, we cannot sit here and do nothing and wait until this kind of technology emerge. That's why we believe that we need to act now for the near-term action. So now I will talk about each kind of technology. First of all, for local generation, domestic renewable energy. So domestic renewable energy is a crucial element of Hong Kong transition to low carbon fuel mix. In the latest climate action plan, the government has set up a target 50% before 2050. However, what is the portion for the local and the regional collaboration? We have no clear ideas, because the government only mentioned is the renewable energy and that's it. And then we estimate domestic renewable energy, therefore we estimate domestic renewable energy can meet 10% of local energy demand in 2050. So there are a couple types of renewable energy that we studied in our research, including waste to energy, solar energy, offshore wind energy. Actually, if the government pick up our recommendation, by 2030 and to 2035, we can come up around 4% of renewable energy. That already makes 4 times different compared with the current situation. And in 2050, we can more ambitious to 10%, which from 3% from waste to energy according to the government waste blueprint, and then solar energy and then offshore wind energy, which are currently executed by 2 energy companies in Hong Kong. So for the waste to energy, we believe that it's a valuable solution, but not a silver bullet for clean energy or waste management. So that the background on the technology side, we can deploy 2 kinds of technology in Hong Kong, which is the anaerobic digestion for the organic waste like the food waste, and then also incinerator of waste in like the plastic, and then also another kind of waste. The current situation is in 2020, 560 gigawatts energy generated through the waste to energy facility. And then it accounts for 83% of all renewable energy in Hong Kong. And then this is the government plan. You can see that the government is quite ambitious to build the waste to energy facility around Hong Kong. And then like the Shaku Show and then the ORCC3 in Shakong, yes. And then, however, we are facing different kind of challenge. We already talked about the background, so let's move on to the challenge. During the planning phase, the public resistance still a really strong force to slow down the deployment. And then also everyone don't want this kind of facility in their backyard, so that it's still quite challenging for government when they plan to build a new IWM incinerator facility. And then during the operation, it may increase the emission like the greenhouse gas emission or other kind of air pollutant, even though the technology is so advanced, but still a new emitter source for Hong Kong. So for our recommendation, we find that both power companies is phasing off their coal-fired power plant gradually. They probably can keep the turbine facility there and then build the new incinerator within their power plant, so that we can make sure that it is very remote from the residential area. And then also with all kind of safety facility within the power plant, and it's more like the upgrade work rather than build an entire new plant on a reclaimed land. So that we would recommend the government command both power company to build the incineration facility, and then also help work with the government to develop a better waste collection facility or system. And then more active to address public concern like enhancing awareness and then increase the transparency, like set up a monitoring network and then to disclose and share the emission data with the public regularly or in real time. The outcome is we can reduce 87% of greenhouse gas emissions from the energy recovery, and then hopefully can reach 3 to 4% of targets in Hong Kong energy mix by 2050. So the next one, solar energy is a highly promising solution that could stabilize 4% energy demand by 2050. The background, you can see the current situation, 0.01% of electricity was generated by the feed-in tariff in 2020. Its estimate is around 200 million kilowatt per year. And then currently we have 2 types of technology, the rooftop solar and floating solar PV. Even though solar PV is still testing, but we can see that our neighborhood region like Singapore already make a really strong commitment to ramp up 4 times generation capacity by 2025. That is a really encouraging news. So that Hong Kong definitely can learn from our competitor Singapore and then install this kind of facility. I will talk in more detail later. However, the challenge during the planning phase, land constraint, limited space for large-scale solar installation because Hong Kong, the land price is very high. And then also for the country part, it's not a good idea to install the solar panel on like the peak everywhere. That is really damage the public image and then our wonderful nature scenery. And then for the regulatory constraint, I know that this is a really long process. If you want to set up or to build a solar panel on your rooftop, or even though some government initial project like to build some solar panel on a surface reservoir which managed by the WSD, they still need to take like 3 to 4 years to conduct the technical analysis and then find a couple of consultants to prove it won't really impact the structure. So that this is a really long process for the approval, even within the government. And then also the rooftop solar, we need to require agreement from the all tenants. And then also in Hong Kong, because our building is quite special, we put all the building surface equipment on the rooftop so that actually not much space for install this kind of technology. And then during the operation, we also find that the solar output is mismatched with our peak demand. As you can see here, this is a really old the low daily load curve on a Legislative Council document 10 years ago. The peak hour is more happen in like the afternoon or like the evening, like from the 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Which means that there are 4 to 5 hours that the solar maybe cannot serve the loading. And then because this one is a really old curve, that's why we spend some time to collaborate with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And then try to use the campus energy data and then build a new load curve. And then you can see here, this is the HKUST electricity consumption trend in summer 2019. The final is that year was still a normal year, we can say. The students still back to the school on the campus, and then you can see that the peak load is still happen like after between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. so that solar maybe is really unlikely to serve the peak loading purpose in this case. So that we come up a couple of recommendations to make the solar energy can deploy much faster in Hong Kong. The first one is the government needs a comprehensive study to examine Hong Kong solar resource, because we find that there are a lot of university-produced world-class research. However, it's really in fragment style. We spend a lot of time to gather all the information and then collect it, and then to come up this research. However, we've considered that maybe the government can gather all the information, work with the power company, and then publish every year to project next 5 years solar energy output, and then also identify where can we build a new solar panel annually, and then inform the public. That can really help to ramp up the solar percentage in the future. And then secondly is don't study anymore the floating solar PV technology, because this is already a viable technology. Singapore massively deployed this technology already. Hong Kong if the government consider install the solar panel in the reservoir is too expensive for them, just let the private sector collaborate with the private sector. For example, rent the reservoir surveys to the private sector and then ask them to install it and then also connect into our grid. That will make the things happen much faster and then more economic viable. And then also can benefit our government. And then therefore I recommend the government consider the corporate-private partnership mode on this kind of installation. And then the fourth one is incentive investment into solar and promote innovative business model. Because like 2 weeks ago when we visited Rethink, and then we found that in Hong Kong we have a lot of innovative startup here. So that I think the government definitely worth to consider collaborate with this stakeholder. The outcome, local solar energy reach 1 to 2% energy mix by 2035, and then local solar reach 4% of energy mix by 2050 according to our projection. And then offshore wind can provide 3% of energy demand by 2050. The current situation is less than 1 megawatt. I believe everyone already knows that the only wind turbine only exists on the Lamma Island. So that this is where the less than 1 megawatt comes from. So the land constraint, offshore wind is a more viable option. The requirement, however, there are some requirement and constraint for install this kind of offshore wind, like the wind power density is about 200 watts per meter square, and then the maximum water depth is 30 meters. The challenge is in the planning phase, seismic activities in surrounding water. You see the water is nothing about, but actually we already built a lot of utilities below the sea, like the optical fiber, power cable, telephone line, a lot of utilities already underneath the seabed. So that actually not much space for us to build the wind turbine. And then at the meantime, Hong Kong is still one of top 10 BC port in the world. And then we also surrounded by a lot of BC ports. So that we most of the water area already occupied by the BC channel. So that's also not really viable. So that therefore, in the planning phase, we need to avoid this kind of area. That makes us not much choice in it. And then the financial risk, high capital investment, the long payback period, that also is a key barrier. In the operation phase, it's really like the wind, also really like the solar. It's also mismatched the demand because Hong Kong, so for the summertime, is not windy as winter. But our peak load is definitely happening during the summertime. So that is also a mismatch. We need to solve it collectively. And then also the typhoon, once the typhoon comes, we need to close down all the wind turbines. So that we also need to think about the contingency plan. Therefore, some recommendation commission a study comprehensively examining Hong Kong onshore and offshore wind resources. We need to update it because of the climate change, it's definitely changed a bit of our climate. And then incentive investment, and then also consider the regional collaboration on offshore wind project. Lauren can talk in more detail. So we expect it can achieve 3.5 to 4% of energy mix by 2050. So let me pass my time to Lauren to talk about the regional collaboration.
So hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a research analyst at Civic Exchange, and now I'm going to go into something a bit more controversial, which is how we can import more renewable energy and nuclear energy from mainland China. So we're doing this because at the end of the day, Hong Kong has quite limited domestic renewable energy. Our optimistic projection is that by 2050 we can get to 10%, but we're looking at where the rest of that can come from. So my research, I focused on regional collaboration, and I'm going to talk about how we can potentially collaborate with mainland China or other regional neighbors on renewables and nuclear. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about what's happening in China at the moment. So as we talked about before, China's energy sector is quite ambitiously moving towards decarbonization, where the 14th five-year plan proposes an 18% reduction in CO2 emissions, and across China, non-fossil fuels would reach 20% of the energy mix at the end of the 14th five-year plan, so I think 2025. So zooming into Guangdong quite specifically, so if you ignore the blue part with thermal power, we can see that their non-fossil fuel, low carbon energy is 11% nuclear, 11% nuclear, 11% hydropower, 6% solar, and 4% from wind. And we can see that Guangdong is also very, very ambitiously trying to scale up its non-fossil fuel energy, and that represents a very strong opportunity for Hong Kong as well. So the first question that we have to ask if we go down this route is, how can we import such kinds of energy from Guangdong, and what kind of power purchase agreement would be the most favorable? So I've kind of identified two main options. So the first option is the same model as DIAB, that's the joint venture with supply contract model. So basically what happens is a Hong Kong power company and a mainland power generator will jointly invest, build, and manage the projects. So if we look at DIAB, I think CLP has a 25% equity interest in the power station and a 12.5% stake in the management company, which means that CLP has some sort of power to determine how this power is run, and we also have a dedicated power cable to Hong Kong. So, but then the joint venture doesn't really guarantee that Hong Kong will get any energy, and that's why we have to further negotiate some supply contracts to use the electricity that is generated. And also we can construct a dedicated power cable from the facility, such as DIAB, over to Hong Kong. And the second option is negotiating power purchase agreements for importing electricity, and this will happen through the mid to long-term energy market. So basically what happens is the power company, Hong Kong Electric or CLP, will negotiate the price and volume of the energy traded, and this energy will be traded through the Guangzhou Power Exchange Center. So that's how Hong Kong can purchase this electricity from the grid itself rather than an individual power generator. But aside from paying for that energy, Hong Kong will have to pay the China Southern Grid a rate to transport from China to Hong Kong. So after considering these two options, I'm going to focus on evaluating them later. But the second question that we have to ask is what kinds of zero carbon energy can be imported to Hong Kong? And again, I've identified two. So firstly, offshore wind on the left and nuclear on the right. So I'm going to talk about them one by one. So Lawrence spoke of it just now about Hong Kong has the potential to import offshore wind, build offshore wind facilities surrounding Hong Kong. But this potential is increased very significantly if we collaborate with Guangdong. So if we look at this diagram here on the left, that's actually the waters around Zhuhai. So that farm over there is called the Guishan Offshore Wind Farm, and it's literally only 20 km from Hong Kong International Airport, so I've indicated Hong Kong over there. By the end of 2020, Guangdong had 1 gigawatt of installed offshore wind capacity, and they're constructing 8 gigawatts more. And they have a provincial target of reaching 15 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2025, and they plan to reach grid parity in that same year. And that means that the price of wind is only going to become more and more competitive in the future. It's a little bit late to kind of tap into that facility, which is at the moment closest to Hong Kong. But this was actually a pilot project that China did for the 12th five-year plan, and I'm expecting that they're going to ramp up their ambition to build more of these farms in the future. So on to nuclear, which is the controversial bit. This map looks a little bit intimidating, but it kind of shows the 12 nuclear power plants are surrounding Hong Kong at the moment, and these plants are either operational, or they're being constructed, or they're being planned. So provincially, in Guangdong, they plan to have 18.5 gigawatts of nuclear power by 2025. And we can consider, we can have a conversation about whether we should have nuclear in the energy mix later, but today I'm going to focus more on the practical opportunities and challenges for interconnections in general. So after talking about how we can connect and what we can connect to, I'm going to talk about how more specifically zero carbon energy can be transported to Hong Kong, and that will be in the background side. So at the moment, CLP has its clean energy transmission system, and they're currently upgrading it, and by 2025 they'll have, I think, 900 megawatts more capacity to transport from mainland China to Hong Kong. But then if Hong Kong is going to import more renewables or nuclear, then there are going to need to be more enhancements and more connections. So, instead of focusing on, whether we should import offshore wind or nuclear, I'm going to focus on the more, nitty-gritty aspects of how we can do so. And so I'm going to probably evaluate more on joint venture versus mid to long-term energy market. So the first issue that I've identified is that construction of a dedicated power cable needs to take 8 to 10 years, which means that if we start now, then we'll only just about be able to meet the 2035 target. So given the time scale it takes, and we need to start negotiating with mainland China now. The second issue that I've identified is about supply availability. So firstly, I mean, there is very, very strong energy demand in Shenzhen at the moment. It's only going to grow in the future. And so this is a different situation from when we built the cable with Daya a long time ago. The second issue is that since China has its carbon neutrality objective, it's got its 14th five-year plan. This means that all the cities in China, all cities in Guangdong, in the Greater Bay Area, are going to have basically exactly the same objectives as Hong Kong. They're going to want to, have more renewable energy. They may want more nuclear, and that's why Hong Kong is going to just face even more competition in the future. And that is another reason why we probably have to start thinking about these problems now. So, I mean, I've been talking about, Guangdong, but then we could also consider actively importing from other countries that may be a bit further away. We haven't really studied that in this study, but in the future we could also assess the potential of importing from elsewhere if these options are cost effective and if they're reliable as well. So yeah, so the third issue is about reliability, and I think that this is really important because if we're interconnecting to a different grid, then we have to assess their feasibility and the reliability as well. So, I mean, just for some background about the China Southern Grid, it really has a very, very extensive network because it transmits power not only in Guangdong, but across China, across provinces in China. And it also exports its energy to countries in Southeast Asia, such as Vietnam, Laos, and then Myanmar. This means two things. On one hand, they have a really strong experience in long-distance transmission. But on the other hand, this means that the reliability is considerably lower because the transmission network is so long. So there's a larger risk of being affected by things like adverse weather or accidents or power cuts, those sorts of things. So the recommendation at this stage is that Hong Kong really needs to monitor how CSG is improving its reliability and need to monitor the infrastructural efforts to improve its reliability to see if it is feasible and acceptable actually for Hong Kong to interconnect with them. Because basically Hong Kong, 1 year we have about a minute of power outage. In the CSG, on average, it's 1 hour in urban cities. And that number is, it's even more unreliable in rural areas. So we need to consider all of these factors as well. So the last factor, which is a very important factor, which is public opinion and public concern towards nuclear. I mean, obviously this is a completely valid concern about the safety of nuclear energy, but we've looked at all the 12 power plants around Hong Kong. They've all installed the third generation nuclear technology, which supposedly is safer than what we've got before. And another issue in terms of public concern is about Hong Kong becoming a captive buyer, because if Hong Kong becomes more reliant on the mainland Chinese power grid, we'll have to, unless we do joint venture, which is what we're recommending, we will be forced to accept mainland prices and accept the reliability of the mainland Chinese grid. So, I mean, after speaking about all these challenges, it appears that a kind of joint venture partnership would mitigate a lot of these challenges. So, for example, in terms of becoming a captive buyer, if we do joint venture and supply contracts, that's not less of an issue. In terms of competition, if we make the negotiations now, that's less of an issue as well. And reliability, that's also less of an issue because if we negotiate in a way similar to Daya Bay, that Hong Kong, it gets priority to get the energy, then I think that will be mitigated somewhat as well. So overall, I've got two major recommendations in this respect. So the first recommendation is to explore the possibility of, importing these two types of energies. And we obviously are recommending to maximize the agency of Hong Kong and the power companies by negotiating joint ventures. And our second recommendation is to explore how we can interconnect with CSG. So whether we should construct new dedicated power cables, construct new cables for the grid itself, and even heighten connectivity between the companies, because that would be a matter of backup power supply, which I'll talk about in a second. So the outcomes that we want to achieve by considering this option is to increase the share of zero carbon energy, increase the diversity of energy sources wheeled to Hong Kong, and thirdly, establish strong regional collaboration. Yeah. And so the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is quite relevant to this as well, is grid balancing. And this is something that utility companies need to do, if you don't know that, to match the supply of electricity with demand. And this is actually quite challenging if we continue to decarbonize our power system because of three main issues. So firstly, increased reliance on renewable energy. Even with advanced battery storage technologies, a lot of uncertainties will exist because of the nature of renewable energy itself. The second challenge would be the increased reliance on Hong Kong's neighbours, meaning that maybe any fluctuations compromising the Chinese grid and CHG will potentially affect Hong Kong as well. But obviously, as I said just now, if you construct a dedicated power cable,
coal, oil, renewables, and nuclear. It can be transported through pipelines or shipped in the form of ammonia, gas tanks, or liquefied. It can also be stored long-term, either overground compressed or liquefied in tanks, or underground in salt caverns, depleted natural gas or oil reservoirs, and aquifers. As an energy carrier, hydrogen produced by electrolysis from green sources could be a long-term solution, while in the form of fuel cell systems, hydrogen can be used to power road vehicles, shipping vessels, and aircrafts. Fuel cell vehicles can operate at a higher efficiency than combustion engines, with efficiencies up to 60%. Fuel cell generators can also be used at off-grid construction sites or data centers, replacing diesel generators to power operations. There are quite a few challenges due to the relatively new technology behind hydrogen. First off, hydrogen production is expensive, especially green hydrogen through electrolysis. Second, regulatory constraints against hydrogen include fuel cell cartridge limitations in Hong Kong. Additionally, hydrogen is regulated by the Fire Services Department rather than the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, creating barriers against testing hydrogen technologies in Hong Kong. Due to limited resources in Hong Kong, the city also must import hydrogen. Now, in terms of recommendations and outcomes, the Hong Kong government has no explicit roadmap to support the adoption of hydrogen in Hong Kong's power sector. Without a roadmap, Hong Kong will lag behind. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. As an energy carrier or as fuel cell systems and generators can increase system stability and energy reliance, reduce costs by flattening the residual load in a power system, provide grid balancing, power backup, releasing grid constraints, and accommodate the peak load. Globally, direct subsidies from local and national governments have helped accelerate the adoption of renewable technologies and enabled a steep annual learning curve for growth of renewable energy, with energy capacities of 35% for solar PV and 30% for offshore wind energy in the past 10 years. If the government were to provide similar support in the form of direct subsidies to promote green funding priorities for hydrogen technologies, Hong Kong could enable a similar learning curve for the growth and efficiency of hydrogen. High costs associated with hydrogen technologies could also decrease if measures such as the enactment of carbon pricing is implemented. Hong Kong should also establish regional and global collaboration to import hydrogen from places like mainland China and Australia or the Middle East, for which shipping costs for the latter to Australia and Middle East cost about $9 to $10 per kg of hydrogen. In order to receive imported hydrogen, Hong Kong could upgrade the existing liquefied natural gas receiving terminal into a hydrogen receiving floating terminal. In terms of town gas, so town gas, in Hong Kong, town gas constitutes approximately 50% hydrogen, with the rest being from naphtha and natural gas. Town gas currently accounts for 8.5% of the city's final energy requirements. In 2020, it produced 1.919 million tons of CO2 equivalent, or 4.73% of Hong Kong's greenhouse gas emissions. Town gas is especially used by Hong Kong residents for cooking and water heating, since Chinese cooking mostly requires a powerful stove or to pan fry or deep fry. Town gas could be replaced through electrification or by hydrogen blending in pipelines. In terms of challenges, so we've already gone through the background. In terms of challenges, electrification requires an expansion of city-wide power capacity by at least 22%. This increase is substantial, but could be achieved well before 2050 if the switch occurs soon. Changes to the town gas manufacturing process will be needed to accommodate a greater share of hydrogen. Costs of electric stoves and electricity will be higher than that of gas stoves and gas, which could place added burdens on residents and small businesses. Employees of gas companies and related industries may lose their jobs or need to be retrained if town gas is replaced by electricity. And in terms of recommendations and outcomes, in addition to forming a hydrogen roadmap, government should provide subsidies for residents to transition their kitchen appliances and gas stoves to electric stoves. Using electric stoves could reduce the reliance on town gas and produce less heat in kitchens, thereby reducing the energy required for air conditioning as well. Moreover, government should study the feasibility of upgrading Hong Kong's existing pipeline network for hydrogen to replace town gas or be co-combusted with natural gas in Hong Kong's 3 combined cycle gas turbines. In addition, making any new fossil fuel power plants that are built after 2020 hydrogen ready will support onshore hydrogen production within Hong Kong. So that's it with hydrogen. Now to CCS. So carbon capture and storage technology is an important technology in decarbonizing Hong Kong. Conventional fossil fuel power plants without CCS produce more carbon emissions than any other decarbonized energy source. Hong Kong has 4 fossil fuel power plants in operation, which are Castle Peak, Black Point, Penny's Bay, and Lama, which use coal, natural gas, and oil. The current total capacity of Hong Kong's coal-fired power generation is 6,108 megawatts. According to power development plans, Hong Kong's power companies are actively replacing coal with natural gas in order to meet the goal of phasing out day-to-day use of coal for electricity generation before 2014. With 2 newly added gas-fired powered generation units in operation, the total capacity of gas-fired power in Hong Kong is 4,310 megawatts, while gas capacity is expected to increase to 5,580 megawatts by 2030. Replacing coal with gas has both climate and air quality benefits. However, this alone cannot help Hong Kong meet its 2050 carbon neutrality target. The transition from coal to gas significantly increases the cost of electricity, as the cost of natural gas power generation is more than double that of coal. Through capturing, transporting, and storing CO2 emissions, CCS technologies could abate emissions from fossil fuel power plants while maintaining dispatchable power output in a flexible manner. This would be of great value to Hong Kong, where fossil fuel-based generation is likely to perform an important role due to limited renewable energy and land resources. Globally, CCS facilities are applied to coal-fired, natural gas-fired, and biomass power plants, including those for waste energy. In terms of challenges, ensuring carbon storage capacity is a key challenge, as well as the slow deployment of CCS, as only 2 commercial CCS facilities are available globally, and retrofits of coal-fired plants, while CCS-equipped gas-fired plants are non-existent. High costs are a major barrier preventing CCS from being commercially viable as well. CCS increases the levelized cost of energy by at least 47.7 to 82.2%, depending on whether the plant is coal-fired or gas-fired. These costs are associated with the capture, transportation, and storage of CO2 emissions, as well as the efficiency penalty required to operate the capture facility. Energy penalties are another impediment to CCS deployment in the power sector. To power the operations of CCS facilities, the energy use and air pollutants for the same amount of electricity output is expected to increase by around 25%. In addition, installing CCS cannot avoid all CO2 emissions, as uncaptured emissions are estimated to be around 5 to 15%. In terms of recommendations and outcomes, ensuring all fossil fuel power plants built after 2020 are CCS ready could reduce the risk of creating stranded assets. Once built, retrofitting existing plants with CCS could be costly or even infeasible. Moreover, CCS deployment could be promoted through strong policy support by the government, capital support, public procurement, tax credits, operation subsidies, and carbon pricing, which could reduce the cost of CCS as a result of scale and learning curve effects. Additionally, Hong Kong is located in a potential CCS hub, High quality and sufficient storage options are prerequisites, and there are several sedimentary basins in the northern South China Sea with suitable geological conditions for CO2 storage. Hong Kong should engage in regional CCS development projects and utilize shared infrastructure to lower transportation and storage costs. CCS-equipped power plants could run for lengthy periods as baseload plants. They can also provide a source of dispatchable and flexible capacity to quickly respond to emergencies and help Hong Kong integrate a growing share of variable renewable energy into the power system. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Fong?
Yes.
So it's your turn.
Can you turn the camera to...
Yes, I will share my screen. Okay, so can you see the screen now?
Yes, yeah. Can you flip to the next slide?
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. So thanks thanks to Lawrence, Lauren, and Simran for the previous presentation. So what we have heard is that we did a very detailed analysis on each of the energy technologies, and we also find that there's no single technology that is able to address the entire power consumption in Hong Kong. So what we did was that we, considering all these options, we come up with 5 scenarios to see how these different options or combination could contribute to the Hong Kong's net zero power system with consideration of climate performance, environmental performance, technical readiness, as well as cost. So we come up with this. So you see on the screen, so there are 5 scenarios. So you see for all of them, so we included the maximum, the optimum percentage of renewable, domestic renewable energy, which is about 10% as presented here. Then for the rest, we have a different combination. So from the left, you see, so the first one is we emphasize more on natural gas with CCS. And the second scenario, we have a much higher percentage of renewable energy. So you see, we have additional renewable energy through regional collaboration in the context of Greater Bay Area. Then the third scenario is that we significantly scale up the nuclear energy. And the fourth scenario, that is emphasizing on diversity, industrial energy security. And the final scenario on the right, so that scenario is what we call fossil free. So you see there's no natural gas. And we get the green hydrogen to add up the energy mix. So let's look at the result with the next slide, please. So this shows the carbon dioxide performance of all these scenarios. So if you look at it at the end of the analysis period by 2050, so all of them will achieve more or less close to zero emission. So that's how we set the target for. So what we should pay attention to in this is which scenario has less cumulative emissions in the next 30 years. So then we see the shape of the curve. Then you can see that this has the bottom 2 lines, so the nuclear and fossil-free scenarios that have less cumulative emissions in the next 3 decades. Next slide, please. Next slide, we see in terms of cost. So we also analyze the cost in terms of the average unit cost that is on the left and the cumulative cost on the right. So overall, so if you look at them, so that there is a bit of a variation in different scenarios. And you see the ranges on the right hand side, so that is we consider uncertainties of the cost of green hydrogen in the next decades. So let's see the range. But overall, we find that the nuclear scenario and the renewable energy plus scenario are most cost-effective among of the 5 scenarios. Next slide, please. Next slide, we will see the environmental components. So besides climate or besides carbon, so we also consider other air pollutants. So as you see on the left, so the bars are the current air pollution that we will have currently, and all the 5 scenarios will have significantly less pollutants compared to what we experience now. So they're more or less the same overall. Then the next slide, you see that this is an overview of the comparison of all the scenarios. So I think from what the analysis shows is that there is no perfect scenario that is outperforming other scenarios. But we do see that the nuclear scenario and fossil-free scenarios are comparatively more advantageous compared to the other scenarios. So what we recommend is that these are just sort of illustrative scenarios that the government may consider as the government is making decision or in the next decades. So we need to, the government may choose one of the 5 scenarios or a combination of these scenarios, and also important to note that we do need to revisit these audit scenarios and assumptions because the technology and cost and so on are changing from time to time. So this is the final slide. So I think the key message is that Hong Kong would be able to reduce about 70% of emission from power sector by 2035. So as I said, so there are many scenarios that we have presented. None of them is perfect, but we do see there are a couple of measures that the government should take immediately. So that's what we call no regret actions. So we listed here some of them. So on the left, you see these are the immediate actions we think are important to consider. First is to look into the domestic renewable energy. So it includes wind, solar, as presented earlier on. The second one is the really low-hanging fruit is the waste heat energy. Then we should also look into or explore how can we expand the regional collaboration in the context of the renewability, as well as to look into how to enhance the grid balancing and allow for more diversified energy sources. Then on the right-hand side is in the longer term, so we do need to explore the potential of green hydrogen and the deployment of CCS technology if we are considering the natural gas generation. And finally, regardless of all this, it's really important to enhance the electrification of the entire Hong Kong society, from transport to the building and others. And I think that's all from my side. Thanks, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. So now is the Q&A session. If you have any question, please feel free to raise your hand and then ask the question, and then our team will answer your question. So anyone have questions? Paul?
So I see you have 2 proposals. Both of them are basically to have a large component of nuclear. Where would that nuclear plant be?
Okay, this is a very good question. Actually, during our research, WRI team closely engaged with the China Sovereign Grid and then also China nuclear company Guangdong, and then also other stakeholders in the Greater Bay Area. And then we find that actually not far away from Daya Bay, that called Ling O Phase 2 power plant is almost ready in operation. So that will be a really good opportunity that can build and upgrade the existing power transmission infrastructure and then wheeling back the electricity back to Hong Kong. So that the Ling O Phase 1 is here, and then Phase 2 is just nearby the Ling O Phase 1. So it's really close to the Daya Bay. And then they also look for the joint venture investment. So that's why we've considered this is an opportunity for Hong Kong.
Sorry, joint venture investment, you're suggesting Hong Kong take ventures the investments in a nuclear plant?
Yes. Daya Bay, like Daya Bay, just replicate one more Daya Bay model. That is bring us a great success in like 30 something years ago. So this maybe can happen again. But the only barrier is how can we build the cable to transmit and wheeling the electricity to Hong Kong, because Shenzhen is no longer like 30 years ago, a small village. The power cable creates a lot of problems in Shenzhen. For example, during our conversation with the Shenzhen Group people mentioned, some villages are separated by the Hong Kong, the power cable connect to Hong Kong into two separate parts. Therefore, the middle part is not possible to develop. That makes people in Shenzhen feel very unhappy. So that we need to think about how can we connect Hong Kong and Ling O power plant in more in a better way. So, but fortunately, we have time to think if the government act today with our power company. Lisa?
I'm interested in the offshore wind from Hong Kong. At what stage are plans to develop the Hong Kong wind opportunity?
You deleted it.
Oh, I think
We had a map which shows that basically there's a lot of potential in the southeast, so that side of Hong Kong. There's also some potential near Lama Island, so where the thing I talked about, Guishan offshore wind farm is. That's in Chinese waters, but in Hong Kong waters there's some potential as well.
I know CLP has spoken for a long time about
Yeah.
wind farm in that area. I just wondered at what stage.
Okay, so now is like reviewing the EIA, because I attend the CLP seminar like a couple months ago, so they try to get the EIA permit and then we execute the project in like outside the cycle, and hopefully can build like around 200 to 300 megawatt wind turbine farm, if I remember correct. Yeah, and hopefully can in service by 2030. Yeah, and then recently, Hong Kong Electric also announced their plan, and then I can see some newspaper article, people criticize the wind farm is too expensive. That I think is not a good conversation, because the transition is really costly. The question is who needs to bear the cost? The corporate or government or the public? That's what I think we need a discussion, rather than just say it's so pricey and it's not a good idea. Any question?
According to your different scenario, how much electricity is still produced in Hong Kong? Yeah, because it really affects the reliability of supply.
Okay, so you can see most according to our scenario, for the natural gas with CCS and then the green hydrogen with CCGT and the domestic renewable energy all generate locally. So that at least like half of the electricity is still generated in Hong Kong to make sure that energy security. This is very important.
How about running nuclear?
It's, the nuclear one is, yes, the nuclear one is still 40%. Because we need to consider about, because we need to consider about the energy security is our top priority, because no one wants to sacrifice the living quality during the transition journey. So that we really, and in particular Hong Kong, in a really high-rise urban environment, we cannot afford any supply disruption. Yeah. That's why at least 40% of electricity will generate locally in 2050, according to our scenario.
Any estimation how much reliability will be reduced? Yeah, because currently power company is running at about 6-9.
Yes.
Yeah, which is quite good.
Yeah, for our scenario, our calculation, we also incorporate the total generation capacity. The reason why we put the loading curve here is when we develop our scenario, we also need to consider the extra capacity to catering the peak load. Therefore, what we mentioned for the 40% is how we serve the peak load. So that there is a safety margin, because in Hong Kong, the total capacity compared with the real demand is like a 30-something% margin to make it safe.
Thank you.
Agree?
I would like to know that if we increase the renewable energy production here in Hong Kong, then is there any kind of suggestion or consideration about the storage of this renewable energy? Because now instant wind, instant solar, that you cannot store. But
yes,
if you want to maintain the peak demand and using the renewable energy, there's some kind of good storage that you can use it back when it is at high peak demand. So I think I wasn't quite clear about this storage of RE.
Okay, so for the storage of RE, we developed some plan, but we definitely need a further research on the grid balancing, because at this moment we only observe there's some the only practical solution is the pump storage system which is located in Shenzhen. But because of the land constraint, this is not really possible for Hong Kong to build another pump storage system to help us to store energy locally. So we are looking for like the hydrogen. However, we will sacrifice like 50% of energy for the energy storage. So battery, it sounds like a viable option. However, for such heavy demand for Hong Kong, actually the current technology is not really can cater our demand. We will keep looking this kind of the grid balancing technology. However, we consider that in the future, I'm really interested to study on the demand control, because if the power company can adjust the demand, that can really help us to distribute the loading more even, and then can consume some of the energy when the renewable generation is high, and then can offer people a cheaper tariff to make sure the energy can use it or can store it separately, or in the individual, or like a smart IoT technology to store the energy in the electrical vehicle. I think 5 or 6 years ago in HKUST, they conducted a research to talk about to use the EV to use the combine the smart grid to store the energy in the EV. However, it's raised some issue like who owns the battery, that will create a really long debate. That's why after this energy research, I think demand control and then the grid balancing will be one of the directions for my research group to study in the future. Thank you.
A follow-up. So if you talk about using batteries to store the energy, and it is very hard for the ownership if the battery is scattered all around the city, then how much land do we need to reserve for battery storage for the house?
We know that the current technology is still consume a huge piece of land, so we need to keep observe the energy storage system before I can answer you this question.
I want to know, in the fossil-free scenario, is there any reason that you don't take the imported renewable energy into the account?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. The reason why we didn't count the imported RE because this is a huge uncertainty. The reason why is the carbon trading market for the power sector already established in the mainland China. Renewable energy is a really competitive resource in the region. In particular the GBA, because you may consider GBA is huge compared with Hong Kong, but compared with if we use the renewable energy, it's still a really small region. That's why we try to minimize all the risks and then create a fossil fuel-free scenario here.
In the study, it's known that the recommendation is to utilize the town gas or natural gas in Hong Kong to produce hydrogen for energy supply. We may know that town gas has a renewable energy business, but I think town gas is still their key business in Hong Kong. So is there any case in other countries or the view of town gas they're ready to use a transition to become a hydrogen supply in Hong Kong? And may note that companies like CLP is already exploring the option to upgrade their coal-fired turbine to hydrogen compatible. Is there any connection between all the recommendation from Civic on this?
So why we consider the hydrogen upgrade the town gas into the hydrogen is a viable option, because we can observe in UK now they already ban the traditional pipe gas in the new building. And then for the old infrastructure, they need to explore the opportunity to upgrade it to hydrogen to make sure they still can enjoy the pipe gas. So that therefore we also consider this is a viable option, because Hong Kong has a really extensive network. And then that also can, like, for the hydrogen and the pipe gas is more flexible. Maybe at the beginning, not really necessary to adopt the green hydrogen immediately. Just make sure the infrastructure here, and then gradually change the composition, and then help us to deliver the transition gradually, and then also can help the populate more affordable, because we foresee that the hydrogen price will go down very rapidly, so that can help us to buy time. Yeah.
So I would like to ask a bit about the RE plus the imported RE. Could you elaborate a bit? So how we could import like 30% of like your RE from GBA or from mainland China? So I know that you talk about a little bit about the offshore rate, but so this is another question that I would like to ask. So you talk about something like joint venture using the same model like the library. So if you develop a new nuclear power plant. So how about using the same framework to develop like a solar project or even another offshore project in the area of mainland China? So with the support of CRP or Hong Kong election.
Yeah, I think definitely we can also apply the joint venture for the RE development in the mainland China, and then in particular the outside Yangjiang region, there are a huge wind farm set up there, and then according to my colleague from WRI, she mentioned that a China company would like exit the wind farm investment recently. That we consider that may be a potential for Hong Kong to pick up this kind of joint venture, to invest into this kind of project, and then bring back the energy back to Hong Kong. This is a viable option. Or for here, like the Guangdong offshore wind, literally it is more close, the site location is more close to Hong Kong compared with mainland China. We definitely can investigate this, can study this kind of opportunity and further invest into the China renewable project. But the reason why we not really talk in our research, because it's very in fragment, and we would like to make the big things done in first place, like the nuclear power project. Once we finish the negotiation, we can bring huge amount of energy to Hong Kong, can help us to reduce our emission fast enough and align with what IPCC 1.5 degree report recommend, reduce half of our emission by 2030. And then once we establish this kind of framework, and then the power company, of course, can negotiate with the mainland peer or mainland government for identify more joint venture investment opportunity, in particular the renewable one in mainland China, and then we'll bring back to Hong Kong.
Lawrence, we are part of, Hong Kong is a part of China,
yes.
And we are quite close to GBA. Among all the 5 scenarios, which one is close to GBA?
So you mean the fuel mix or?
Fuel mix.
So for the fuel mix, because at this moment the mainland government haven't really aligned, the Guangdong province haven't aligned the fuel mix in really detail at this moment, so that I cannot really answer your question. We need to wait until the end of this year when the Guangdong government submitted the action plan to the central government. We can know more from the Guangdong province. Yeah. But for the national wise, it already set up a really clear target. Nuclear is one of the key action area for mainland China, for China. Yeah, I can share you the China energy mix in 2060 after my presentation.
One more thing. Now, since I understand that there are many countries, no matter in the West or in the Asia, have a big investment in green hydrogen production. Now, if we talk about in a scenario, just like imported RE, we have imported hydrogen, green hydrogen, then the picture could be not really just 15%, could be quite a big one. Because when you say buy coal and natural gas, Hong Kong, buy from all over the world, not just from mainland China, buy from Australia, from Middle East, then similar green hydrogen you can buy worldwide, and then the percentage could be really increased, and the technology production by all other countries around us getting competitive, then the green hydrogen price will drop down, and I think we could go for more of the imported green hydrogen to make us, decarbonize.
Yeah, thank you for adding recommendation. Actually, why we come up with this 5 scenario is actually we build numbers of scenarios, and then we go through analysis, a really in-depth analysis, and then find that this 5 is the most benefit for Hong Kong based on the economical rise and then also the air emission rise and then the technology feasibility rise. So that, however, Edwin raised a very good point, and we did put it, actually we already incorporated in our recommendation is here, so that we need to start, because we not only want Hong Kong to join the national hydrogen grid, because that will create a monopoly situation for Hong Kong. And then we learn from the LNG supply contract. If we just only have a single source of energy source, that we have no bargaining power on the price of supply. That's why we recommend Hong Kong government work with the energy company, study the feasibility to upgrade the existing, not this one, is this one. The feasibility to upgrade the LNG receiving terminal into hydrogen receiving terminal. That can help us to tap in the global sources to Hong Kong. Maybe at this moment, not really necessary green hydrogen. We could think about the gray hydrogen or the pink hydrogen or the blue hydrogen. Just make sure that our operator familiar to operate this kind of and can handle safe this kind of energy source, and then gradually change to green one. Thank you. So I think Paul is the last question.
Thank you for the last one. Is either nuclear plus natural gas or nuclear plus hydrogen? Those are the 2 main recommendations. Both of them nuclear.
Yes.
And the issue has been the supply for nuclear, and you showed the map and the cable is an issue and so on. Is there a call for building a nuclear plant closer to Hong Kong, renting an island off the shores of Hong Kong for a nuclear plant? Is that not the more expedient solution than depending on the mainland, which its own power systems is under great pressure? There's not enough supply being built up. Power demand is going to continue to grow in the mainland dramatically. There's 100 million people that need power in the Greater Bay Area. Is there a call for Hong Kong to have its own power, nuclear, on a rented island? Because we may not have enough space in Hong Kong close to the community.
So actually we engage with the local and mainland China stakeholders to study all the feasibility, even some more crazy idea, folding nuclear power plant. But it takes time. We, according to the IPCC AR6 report, we only 9 years left. So we need to identify the most feasible rapid solution. That's why we recommend invest into the Lingo nuclear power plant and then build a cable connection to Hong Kong, make it happen. Use 10 years and make it happen. Otherwise, we would like to spend you can take the incinerator as reference. We spend more than 10 years to discuss, and then now is keep delay. I remember the first announcement is 2017 will in operation. But now, according to the latest government plan, it's 2025 in operation.
The first line by Dr. Sarah here is 2014 is still in zero.
Yeah.
It's delayed a lot.
So it's quite so it's difficult. That's why we hope, because Xiaoqiang already identified some viable options, so we consider it's worth to go ahead. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so for the last one is the group photo for the Civic Exchange and WRI team. Okay.
Lisa will be delivering.
Oh.
Thing first.
Yes. Oh, Lisa.
My job. This is really has been a collaborative effort and a long, hard effort, very well supported by the sort of the technical WRI team from Beijing and DC. So again, much appreciated in terms of their engagement here. Of course, this is a critical issue for Hong Kong in terms of our own pathway to decarbonise our city. Power sector is really a central question, as we all know. It's central to the question around buildings, it's central to the question around mobility, and those are the other two major consumers or emitters of carbon in Hong Kong. So this is the one we need to get right. And we have presented 5 scenarios to you. Again, there were multiple scenarios, as Lawrence has said, multiple scenarios that we did look at, but we're honed in on those 5 that seem the most feasible. But we all know technology is changing. As Edward has said, there's obviously developments elsewhere that will feed into Hong Kong, and that's going to be a critical part of our journey. But these 5 scenarios the team has come up with are the ones that are feasible. But I do hope that after today's presentation you have a strong sense that Hong Kong can decarbonise, that we do have a pathway to decarbonise, and that the power sector is really behind this whole notion of decarbonising our economy. They're already making steps themselves towards stepping away from coal-fired power plants. So there is that sort of wide support, I think, not only from the companies, from government, and also from society. And it's important that Civic Exchange continue to build knowledge, build understanding of why we have to decarbonise in order to generate that support. As Lawrence has said, also there are going to be those trade-offs in terms of cost for the transition. So we need that wide build-in. So we do hope that you take away from the session the knowledge that you gain here, you use our materials as you see fit, and really push this understanding in society of why we have to decarbonise. I think those 2 typhoons that we experienced in the last week, the sense that the temperature is rising in Hong Kong, that we will suffer if we don't decarbonise. It's a local issue, but it's a global issue. So on both their levels, we need to be acting, and everybody needs to do their bit individually, companies, government, and Civic Exchange. This is their contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now can I invite the authors and also our board members?
Mr. Fong and Xiao Chen photo.
It's so big.
They are so big.